Thursday, November 13th, 2025, AGNDD intelliReport topic. The man who helped avert nuclear Armageddon. Please pardon any visual and informational inaccuracies in this entirely AI-generated article-based video. The man who helped avert nuclear Armageddon. In 1983, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov trusted his intuition and called a warning of an incoming missile a false alarm. By Kelly Maria Korducki. Published November 12, 2025, History.com. On the evening of September 26, 1983, Soviet officer Stanislav Petrov took his seat for a 12-hour shift at the Serpukhov 15 Command Center near Moscow. The top-secret operation boasted a computer system that analyzed satellite data for signs of a launch from U.S. ballistic missile fields. If the Americans chose to strike, the system promised to buy the Soviets a few much-needed minutes to decide whether to react. The first few hours of the shift passed quietly, as Washington Post contributing editor David Hoffman writes in The Dead Hand, the untold story of the Cold War arms race and its dangerous legacy. Then, shortly after midnight, a siren blared from inside the bunker. A nondescript wall panel across the room flashed awake with angry red letters, "Launch." The system declared high reliability that the U.S. had just fired one of its missiles. Additional missile reports swiftly followed, setting off a new warning: missile attack. Petrov's team began to panic. But something wasn't adding up. Petrov had been trained that a U.S. nuclear attack would involve hundreds of missiles, not a handful. A lack of telescope or radar confirmation added to his suspicion that the warning was a glitch in the system. Though he didn't know for sure, Petrov trusted his instincts. He called his commanders and reported the alert as a false alarm. Petrov later became known as the man who saved the world for the event, which is widely believed to have prevented a catastrophic Soviet retaliation. Although the reality is a bit more complicated, Petrov's actions demonstrated the critical role of human judgment in a high-stakes moment of the Cold War. A tumultuous year. The modern understanding of Petrov's decision is informed by the context of the surrounding months. The incident unfolded during what may have been the most perilous year of the entire Cold War, marked by a cascade of events that drove U.S.-Soviet tensions to a head. That March, President Ronald Reagan delivered what became known as his Evil Empire speech, shutting down calls for a nuclear freeze, a two-way halt on manufacturing, testing, and using nuclear weapons that would effectively end the nuclear arms race. Later that month, Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, a program aimed at building space weapons that could shoot down incoming missiles. Just weeks before Petrov clocked in for his fateful work shift in September, Soviet jet fighters shot down a South Korean passenger plane that had strayed into Soviet airspace, killing all 269 civilians on board and deepening U.S. hostilities. The turmoil didn't end there. That November, NATO conducted Able Archer 83, an unusually realistic military exercise that the Kremlin misread as a possible prelude to nuclear attack. 9 days after the war games wrapped, the apocalyptic made-for-TV movie The Day After aired on ABC. The film, which imagined the aftermath of a nuclear attack on America, became one of the most watched television broadcasts of all time. Tom Nichols, a professor emeritus of national security affairs at the U.S. Naval War College, says the events culminated in an ongoing war scare without precedent. Officials on either side of the Iron Curtain braced for the worst. The Cuban Missile Crisis was short and intense, says Nichols, now a staff writer for The Atlantic. 1983 was just one thing after another. What really happened? There's no question that Soviet defenses were high when Petrov phoned in the false alarm. But it's unlikely that Petrov single-handedly prevented a strike, says Pavel Podvig, a senior researcher at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research and author of the independent research project Russian Nuclear Forces. Nobody would have pressed the button, he says. Nobody would have launched anything based on that information. Podvig explains that Petrov was several layers down the chain of command in a data monitoring position. Any launch alert automatically moved up the chain to higher command centers, including the Air Defense Forces, the General Staff, and finally the National Command Authority. Petrov couldn't have stopped or approved a retaliatory launch himself. Even if the alert had been taken seriously, Podvig points out that the Soviet process required multiple confirmations and deliberate steps before a strike. The top leadership would first issue a preliminary command, which only enabled the system to transmit a launch order. The actual decision to fire would come only after direct evidence of nuclear detonations on Soviet soil. Finally, false alarms were relatively common. There were established procedures for verifying alerts, so one officer's judgment call would rarely make or break the decision process. Although Petrov didn't have the power to prevent a launch, Podvig still considers his actions commendable. The Soviets were fiercely proud of their computerized warning system. In such a rigid, hierarchical system, Podvig says Petrov's decision to follow his intuition took courage and guts. About the author. Kelly Maria Korducki is a Brooklyn-based journalist, writer, and editor who covers business, technology, work, and culture.
Thank you for watching this AGNDD intelliReport, dear viewers. Please like, subscribe, and click the bell button to get notified during new uploads. And make sure to tune in next time. Stay safe and healthy. Cheers!